Hey, first of all, I want to thank Chuck for having me up here. I got a lot of respect for Chuck, his organization, and what he's putting together. He is the leader in this field, no doubt about it. He's got real-world experience, and for him, bottom line is he's just wanting to get the word out to churches. There's 375,000 churches in the country. No one person can do it all, and you guys are out there fighting the fight each week. Not only the fight in terms of keeping your flock safe, but also the internal conflict with trying to overcome the "it can't happen here" mentality. That's the biggest obstacles that most people have to overcome. We'll talk about that in just a little bit. As far as my name is Vaughn Baker. I'm with Strategos International, and my background, I have 20 years law enforcement experience, 13 years in special operations, and what that means is absolutely nothing if we can't share some information with you that will be useful in your world. Technically, just like a lot of you guys, I'm an expert because I came farther than 50 miles away and I have a briefcase. So that technically makes me an expert. Okay, so we got a lot of experts in the room, I'm sure. Okay, the good news is we will be done by or before 5 o'clock. I will promise you it will be 5 o'clock somewhere when we get done. How's that? Okay.
Sounds like a song.
Does it?
5 o'clock somewhere.
Exactly. Okay, protecting our churches. Is it biblically, ethically, and legally the right thing to do? We all agree, yes, yes, and yes is the answer to that question. And this is the first thing we've got to ask ourselves. Those that enter our church walls, should they have a plan for their safety when they enter our church walls? So that's something they should be thinking about. You're shaking your head no. Why not?
Well, they assume that it's going to be safe and comfortable.
Well, they assume or they take for granted their safety when they come into the church, which is what we want them doing. If they're focused on whether or not they're going to be safe or whether or not their children are going to be safe in the nursery, guess what they're not focusing on? The purpose of why they're there. Okay? So we want them to take their safety for granted. Now, it's hard for you and I to comprehend that mindset because everywhere we go, we're always thinking about our safety. You know, my wife gets tired of it because we went to go see a movie, and when I walked into the movie theater, it was a big movie theater, it was an IMAX movie theater. I'm kind of stopped, I kind of looked around a little bit, and she goes, "What are you doing?" I said, "Nothing." She goes, "Oh, whatever." And she's used to it now. What I was thinking about, this movie theater was packed. There was two fire exits towards the front and one in the back where we came in. So I'm thinking if a fire breaks out in here, guess which door I'm going to? Any ideas which door I'm going? I'm going to the door that's closest to the fire. Why is that? Because nobody's going out that door. Okay, I'm not going to get caught up at the door where we got hundreds and thousands of people trying to get out of. We already know the answer to this question as well. Law enforcement are not the true first responders. I heard Greg talk about this morning. He had a great block on this morning. Who is the first responders? You all are. Success or failure is going to be up to you. So you get to take all the glory if things go great, and guess who gets blamed if things don't? Okay? That's where the fight is won or lost. What happens immediately when the incident happens, whether we're talking about a medical incident, a lost child, or something, God forbid, all the way up to an armed intruder. Okay? This question was asked to me, or actually it wasn't even a question, it was a statement that a pastor said to me one time. I did a radio interview with a pastor that had a radio show on Air America. Anybody familiar with Air America? Okay, they're not around anymore. Yeah. He had a radio show called State of Belief, and when his producer asked if I could do this interview, I went and researched him, and I was like, okay, I'm going into the lion's den. I got to get ready. So the first thing he said was, "Well, I just don't agree with this idea of having guns in church." And I said, "Well, I'm not sure I understand if there's a question there or not." He goes, "No, that's not a question, that's just a statement." And I said, "Well, Pastor, I don't agree with having guns in church either." And he goes, "Well, what do you mean you don't agree with it? From what I read on your website, you teach a class on it." I said, "Oh, I misunderstood you, Pastor. I thought you meant you didn't agree with bad guys coming into church and killing people. That's what I disagree with." "No, that's not what I meant." I said, "Okay, well, I misunderstood you." Then he said this right here. or we show a lack of faith in God to protect by preparing for the worst. What do you think about that? No, we're not. And I told him, I said, Pastor, you even disagree with that statement. And he goes, no, I don't. I don't disagree with something I believe. I said, well, let me ask you this. When you went to your radio show today, did you put your seatbelt on? And he goes, well, sure I did. I said, you got any kids? He says, yes, I got a couple. They're in college now, but I have kids. I said, when they were little, did you teach them to look both ways before they cross the street? He goes, well, sure I did. I said, well, Pastor, you're showing a lack of faith in God to protect by telling your kids to look both ways before they cross the street and by putting your seatbelt on. I said, that mentality doesn't wash. Okay, all Chuck's doing by putting on events like this all over the country is teaching churches to put their seatbelt on and to look both ways before they cross the street. We already know biblical authority. Now, Matthew 10:16, you guys have probably seen this. Behold, I send you out as sheep amongst wolves, therefore be as wise as serpents and harmless as doves. What's that verse tell us?
Be prepared.
Prepare in advance. Okay, Theodore Roosevelt sitting right there. Okay, is that right? I'm not a very good history buff. Okay? So we prepare in advance, but we do so in a way that doesn't compromise the core mission of the church. Okay? We'll talk about that here in just a second. Now, who are the wolves? According to this verse. Bad guys, right? Who are the sheep? The flock is the congregation, visitors, members of the sheep. Who are you guys? You guys are the sheepdogs. You're right. Now, tell me, in the truest sense of the word, the sheep, what do the sheep think about the sheepdogs in real life? If you had to guess, what do they think? They're a nuisance. They're always nipping at my heels. Okay, but guess what? When the wolf shows up, guess what those sheep think? Man, where's the sheepdog at? Get over here. Okay? You guys are the sheepdogs. They get tired of you nipping at their heels. Asking the women if they put their purses away or if they left them sitting out in the choir room with the room unlocked. Did they lock their doors? Did they leave their purses in their cars? All those sorts of things. But guess what? When the wolves show up, they're glad you guys are around. And when they hear about it on the news that happened over in the next community over, I've even had them come up and say, listen, I really take for granted what you guys do, but it sure is nice to have you guys around. As long as we don't compromise the core mission of the church. Okay? All kinds of verses. If you're an Old Testament guy, I got several verses from the Old Testament. Now, let's talk about the core mission of the church. What should it be? Well, it'd be nice if we could provide, our church could provide an atmosphere of comfort, refuge, worship, and learning. Okay, that should be the core mission of the church. That right there, that core mission, is what will help us to make decisions based on strategies, policies, procedures, you name it. So somebody comes up with this bright idea about how we're going to make the church safer. All we got to do is we got to give it a little litmus test according to the core mission. Is that going to compromise the core mission of the church? So if somebody comes up to you and says, you know what? We got it in the budget. I think we're going to put some metal detectors up at the doors and we're just going to do pat downs and everybody comes up here. Would that violate the core mission of the church? Sure would. So we got to figure out a different way to do it. Okay? Now specifically what we're going to talk about today is active shooter response for church security personnel. And responding to that worst case scenario. Now, why do we prepare for this? Well, one of two reasons an organization prepares for any all-hazard event. The first one is it likely to occur? What is the frequency dictate that we need to prepare in advance? Well, let's just say, last year, if you do the math, we had 51 violent incidents at church out of 375,000 churches. What's that tell us? Is it likely to occur? It's not likely to occur, so why do we prepare then?
If it does, it's very bad.
Exactly. What's your name?
Larry.
Larry, that's a great answer. You know how good an answer that is? That's a football answer. Okay? The answer is we prepare because of the impact that it would have if it did occur and we weren't prepared. Now, if you're talking about medical emergencies, we're going to hit high on both of those categories. It's likely to occur And it's going to have a significant impact if it does occur, especially if we're not prepared. Now, how many of you have kids at home or have had kids at home that you were willing to admit to? Okay? Those kids, every single year they go to school, what are they doing twice a year usually, as far as fire is concerned? Fire drills. Okay? Now, we know that doesn't hit high on the likelihood. You know why? Because we haven't had a child killed in a school fire in over 50 years. We haven't even had a child hurt in over 25 years in a school fire. 119,000 schools in the country, 60 million kids a year go to school. That's pretty good, isn't it? But if you go back and do the math on violent incidents at school, it's hundreds of people hurt or killed. Okay? But we're still doing fire drills. It's not likely to, when you go home tonight, that when you go to bed with your family, a furnace is going to start leaking carbon monoxide and you're all going to lose your family. But guess what you do, just in case? What do? You get carbon monoxide detectors, put them in your house. Go ahead. Huh? Yeah, you're right. You get a football for that. Usually I don't let guys politic for footballs, but now you got to fight for it. Okay, so usually this is the first question that gets asked. What's the cost of, okay, you convinced me, what's it going to cost us? Well, usually when I was in law enforcement, if I went to the boss and wanted training or equipment, he'd say, okay, you got me. You beat me on the liability fight. I don't want to have to answer this on the backside because you told me about it and I didn't do anything. What's this going to cost me? I said, well, boss, you're asking the wrong question. What's the first question we should be asking? Exactly. That is a football answer. Okay? What's it going to cost if we do nothing?
I gave him one.
You already did?
Mine really didn't.
Wasn't good enough for you?
No, I don't think mine really deserves.
Okay. I appreciate you standing up and being a stand-up guy about that.
All right, cool.
Okay, we'll see what we can do to get you one. How's that? Sounds like somebody that knows you well there.
Yeah, pretty well.
Okay, so before we talk about response and what training preparation we need to have to respond to a person that's willing to come into a crowded environment in a public place and kill people, let's talk about this right here just a little bit. Awareness. It really doesn't matter if you got a whole safety security team full of Navy SEALs if you don't have this right here. This right here is the single biggest step any organization can take to increase this atmosphere of safety and security in your worship environment. Okay, this idea of being aware. Now, awareness, all of us have this sense of awareness. It's called our sixth or seventh sense. Guess what sense we call that? Sixth?
Spidey.
Okay. What else? Somebody else just said it.
Spidey sense.
Spidey sense. You want a football, Chuck? No. Okay. Okay, it's our Spidey sense. You guys, everybody remember Spider-Man? What was Spidey sense? What was the Spidey sense? Yeah, I can see danger and perceive danger in advance, or if nothing else, perceive that something's not right here. This is out of the ordinary. Okay, now most everybody has that sense about them. Guess where they fall down at, though? Acting on it. And worse than that, they'll say somebody else will act on it, or they'll say, you know, that's kind of strange he's acting that way. He's probably just doing A, B, or C. Okay? That's where people fall down. We got to teach them if they see something to say something. It's kind of the old New York, what they're going over in New York. See something, say something. Or what a pastor told me one time, hey, can you add a word on that? I said, what's that? He says, see something, say something now. I said, okay, if that makes you feel better, I agree with that. He goes, no, here's why. And he told me this story. And let's pretend like Kevin here's the usher at the church. He said, I had an usher came up to me and told me about this story of this idea of awareness. And this usher said, somebody came up to him, who was a visitor on a Sunday, and said, hey, where's your security team at? Guess what the usher said? Well, we don't have one. Guess what this guy said? Okay, don't worry about it. I got it covered. I'm packing, okay? This is a visitor. Now the usher decided he wanted to say something because that was unusual. Again, like Greg said this morning, it's called a clue. But guess when he said something?
After service.
Nope, he said it on Tuesday after the Sunday service. It's too late. Pastor, as lovingly as he could, said, hey, thanks for saying something. Do me a favor, would you say something sooner? Oh, okay, yeah, I'll do that. Okay? So again, state our ability to perceive, feel, or be conscious of events, objects, and developing circumstances. We don't have to understand them though. We don't have to understand what is happening, just that this is out of the ordinary. Let's give this one another look. Again, realities. Acts of violence are on the increase in churches and other public places. Preparation is everyone's responsibility. Law enforcement, church leadership. We're talking about bringing our church's organizational leadership and making sure it does not conflict with law enforcement, what their response is going to be. And then here's a phrase that's not very popular nowadays. Individual responsibility. Okay? Law enforcement preparation is still critical, however. Because many times we talk about, when we do school courses, we say, we know most of these guys are going to commit suicide when they're presented with a fight. Because they show up there because they're looking for victims, not people that are willing to fight back. That's the reason they pick those locations. If they wanted to fight, guess where they'd be showing up? They show up at the police station and do this. But they're not.
Sorry.
Oh, is that a football answer?
No. I just put my
Okay. Okay, it's going to be over prior to law enforcement getting there. There's only been 5 or 6 incidents that have been directly resolved by law enforcement in the last 30 years. When I say directly resolved, I mean law enforcement showing up during the attack, taking on the bad guy, and taking him down. Okay? Fort Hood was one. Red Lake, Minnesota. The police substation just happened to be across the street. They heard the shots. San Diego, California, we had a officer that was registering his daughter for school. He was off duty when he heard the shots. Okay, incidents like that, most of these incidents, with the exception of Fort Hood and the mall shooting in Salt Lake City, where the officers were off duty or they just happened to be there. It was just dumb luck. One officer was presenting in a school, presenting a presentation to the kids, and he heard the shots. Okay, most of them are going to be over before police gets there. You're not going to see direct resolution by law enforcement. Now, you may see indirect resolution by law enforcement. Any ideas what I mean by that? How about this? There's a football riding on it. Indirect resolution by law enforcement. What do I mean by that? Training. What else? Their presence. What do you mean by that? The bad guy knows they're there, and guess what the bad guy does then? He goes somewhere else or what? Or he decides, okay, game over, I'm going to go ahead and do it myself. So, the shooter at Virginia Tech would be an example. Once he knew the police were on the scene, and he knew they were on the scene because he chained the door shut, when they breached the front door with a shotgun, he said, okay, the gig's up, I'm going to go ahead and do myself. Okay, that's indirect resolution. We've had several of those types of incidents. Again, he doesn't want to fight. When he knows the fight's coming to him, that's when he'll do the hard work for you. And that's where we talk about how are we going to respond. And we'll talk about that here in just a little bit. So we're talking about your organizational response or your church team's response combined with law enforcement response in a strategic way. And we'll talk about the importance of planning how you're going to do this in conjunction with your local law enforcement in advance and making sure they know what your capabilities and your response capabilities are, as well as your protocols on how you're going to respond. Why would it be important they know that?
So you don't get shot.
Exactly. So you don't have a blue on blue situation where you got good guys shooting good guys. Because I promise you, they're not going to care much about what you're wearing. All they're going to see is a guy with a gun in their hand. Most of them.
That's a football.
Okay. Yeah, I am. I brought enough for an 8-hour class, so we'll get it knocked out in an hour and a half. How's that? Okay, so here's what this is a cell phone video from Virginia Tech that I'm going to show you here. Is anybody here a math major? Are you? Okay, here I want you to get your pen and paper ready.
Well, that was a long time ago.
Okay, well this isn't hard math. Here's what I'm going to ask you to do. Too late. You raised your hand. Okay, you're going to hear some gunshots on here, on this video, and I'm going to point to you when I hear the first one. Every gunshot you hear, I want you to make a little tick mark on your piece of paper. Okay? Who's got a stopwatch on their watch? Come on. Here we go. Can you keep track? As soon as I point to you, when you hear the first shot, I want you to hit start your watch. How's that? Okay? And then we'll stop it and we'll talk about it just a minute. This is a cell phone video that a bystander took of Virginia Tech. Might have to turn it up a little bit.
Listen to how the shooting played out on campus.
SWAT team showing up.
Whoa!
Stop.
Just shocking video there. You can hear the gunfire ring out, and just to let you know, this takes us to the scene of what happened there on the Virginia.
Okay. What's the verdict? How many shots?
24, but I couldn't tell if some of those, some were
Static.
moving a little at the back.
Okay.
too.
What'd you have, 25?
25.
Okay, what was the time frame? Okay. Hit it right on the money. 56 seconds, 27 rounds fired. One of those was an 870 shotgun fired by the SWAT team. Okay, so we subtract 26 rounds fired in 56 seconds. So that just tells you how much carnage can occur before the police get there. Now, guess what the record is in terms of law enforcement response to one of these things? What the record is? Besides the ones where they just happen to be there already.
12 minutes.
12 minutes, what else?
56 seconds.
No, actually, it was 2 minutes. Virginia Tech was the record. 2 minutes, we had SWAT teams going in the door. Okay, now, in 2 minutes, the reason for that is they were already called out because they were going to serve search warrants on the initial suspect's home, which is the Emily's boyfriend that they found on her screensaver on her computer. They thought he was the attacker maybe because he found her there with the other victim, which was a male. They thought it might have been a deal where he showed up and found them together. So they were already activated, and after the initial 2 that were killed at 7:17 a.m., or at least the call they responded to, it was an hour and 11 minutes later, actually longer than that. 9:26 a.m. is when the first shots were fired at Virginia Tech. In 2 minutes, we had SWAT teams going in the door. That's unheard of. You guys that are cops here, what do you think about that as a response team from SWAT? What's the average time for SWAT to get there? 45 minutes is really good. Typically an hour, a little bit longer. But if you can get them there within 45 minutes, that's real good, okay? So even though we set the record that day on law enforcement response, guess what other record was set that day? Number of people killed with a firearm, okay? Number of people killed, period, in an attack at a school was the Bath School bombing in 1927. We had 45 killed and 53 wounded, okay? That was the number of people killed with a bomb blast. But number of people killed with a firearm was Virginia Tech, even though we had the record law enforcement response. So what's that tell us?
That's not the answer.
Waiting for law enforcement to get there is not the answer.
That's right.
Okay, after First Baptist Church in Maryville the pastor was murdered. We were out there last November training up their people, their 75 of their service personnel, and they walked us through the incident while they were in the sanctuary, and it was pretty surreal. And I was talking to Carl and Jeff. Is it Jeff? Yeah, earlier about New Life. And And I was really blown away about one of the things they said they struggle with is still this mentality of it can't happen here again. And Maryville is going through that same thing where they have some leadership that are saying it can't happen here again. And that's not only is it totally wrong mindset, but it's a negligent mindset. And worse than that, in my opinion. Denial. Yeah, denial. It's the ultimate denial. Okay? So, Crimes Against Persons 2009 from churchsafetynews.com. Last year we saw 51 acts of violence or shootings. Right there you can kind of see the pin map. Now the previous year was 18, so we saw, even though from 07 to 08 we saw 175% increase in violence at churches, 08 to 09 we saw 277% increase. And guess what's happening this year? We're on pace to double 09. We're on pace to have over 100 this year of violent incidents that occur at churches. So, hey, remember that song, Mama Told Me There'd Be Days Like This? Remember that song? Who else told us there'd be days like this? Yeah, good Lord. So don't be surprised. It's going to get worse. The good news is you guys have already overcome the big D already, which is what? Denial, okay? And that's why you're here. Go ahead, sir.
Don't you think that a lot of this is due because of the economy and that now, and the pressure?
Economy's part of it.
Put on families.
I think that could be part of it. The other part of it is news media. The reason for that is you got a lot of people out there on the edge already, and there's a lot of people that have already made the decision in their own minds that they're going to kill themselves. But then all of a sudden they see it on the news, a shooting in a school, church, rest home. Last year in North Carolina there was a rest home that was attacked. And all of a sudden the light bulb goes off for those people. What are they thinking? Oh man, I was going to kill myself anyway. What a way to be remembered. Okay, I'm going to go try to set the new record. That's what the motivations are. Okay, so they get the idea from the media. Now, a lot of these incidents, especially this year, aren't being covered nearly as heavily as they were initially because it's becoming normal. Even though there was a time, and you'll see here, we'll go over one of the first incidents. Now, the mission of church safety and security is de-escalate. Now, I put this picture up here so you can see this is actually a picture of de-escalation going on. What do you think about that? Man, that guy must be getting paid 6 figures is all I can figure. Okay? Now, if our mission as church safety and security is to de-escalate situations, a lot of times when we see this word de-escalate, guess what comes to people's minds? Warm and fuzzy. Oh, they're going to go up and talk to them all nice and pretty and we'll de-escalate this situation. But just because we say the word de-escalate does not mean that it's automatically going to be warm and fuzzy. Most of the time it will be. If you know how to talk to people, you can de-escalate most situations. And the reason I put this picture up here is sometimes we have to escalate our approach to de-escalate the situation. If we know whatever act is going on inside of our church, whether it's a protester, somebody that's coming in, causing a distraction, or like a church in West Texas that happened. Guy came in, this happened a month ago, laid out a prayer rug in the foyer and started doing his prayers. Okay? If we know the mission, if that's violating our core mission, then we got to figure out a way to de-escalate that situation. Sometimes we have to escalate our approach. De-escalate defined as to decrease in size, scope, or intensity. How do we do that? There's lots of different ways to do that. Most of the time we can de-escalate through good people skills and strategies. Sometimes we have to escalate our approach. Active shooter response is an example of that. Going up and talking to somebody warm and fuzzy when they got guns and they're intent on setting a new record isn't going to work, is it? Okay, so we have to escalate our approach to de-escalate the situation. Now, look at this picture. Why, if you know the attacker's goals is to set the new record, he doesn't care. In fact, part of his plan is to die. He doesn't care if he lives or dies, but usually most of the time their plan is to die at the end of this. Looking at this picture, why is our churches an attractive target? Target-rich environment, but give me more specifics.
They're not looking at him.
They're not looking at him. Yep. They got their backs to him. Okay. You got my arm twisted behind my back. We've got our backs to them. They're target fixated on what? What are they target fixated on? Well, most churches, you'd like to think that the pastor was good enough that people would be fixated on the message, right?
Worship team.
Or the worship team. So when the attacker comes in, he's seeing backs. He's seeing lots of, it's a target-rich environment. They're target fixated. What else? Tell me about escape. Ability to escape easily. Limited access to escape. Got people jammed in next to each other. It's going to be absolute chaos as soon as the rounds start. We're going to have people falling over each other, screaming and yelling. A lot of people just hiding. Guess what happens with most people? You see two people that get in a fight and one of them's getting their butt kicked real bad. What's that person do? They get in the fetal position. So most people, when that parasympathetic nervous system activates, and that's the system that will activate when you give up, people go fetal because they don't know what to do. So they think the body goes fetal when it's trying to protect itself. It's natural. Large crowds perceived as victims by the attackers, people that will not fight back. Target fixated on the platform, got their back towards the suspect's location. They're immobilized in their seats with no quick escape. Most of the time we can convince people that it's okay to fight back if we talk to them about what the alternatives are and we show them in the past what has occurred as far as the alternatives are concerned. Have you ever heard this phrase, good guys finish last? You agree with that? Nope. It's partially true. Unprepared good guys finish last. Okay? That's the bottom line. Now, I hear this word a lot in especially police training, but I'm hearing a lot more when it comes to training people in other environments, corporate, school, churches, and this word of survival. Now, I don't like that word, survival. If I'm a police officer and my goal is survival, and I go in and I'm searching a house and with my partner, and I forget to check behind the door, and I step in and I get shot in the back, my partner comes in and saves the day, shoots the bad guy and drags me out of there. I'm paralyzed from the waist down. I got a colostomy bag I'm going to have for the rest of my life. I survived it, didn't I? Is that good enough? Surviving it isn't good enough. What do we want to do? I don't want to survive. I want to win. I want to prevail. Surviving isn't good enough. So if we teach people prevailing as opposed to surviving, that's a lot of times what Greg was talking about this morning in the RAD training. I'll just go ahead and let him rape you. You'll survive the incident. Well, we know statistically that's not necessarily the case. But it sets a totally defensive mindset on the person. Surviving is defensive. Okay? It's okay to fight back. This is what I've told my wife and a lot of people. Hey, you may get beat, but you better get beat doing something. Don't get beat doing nothing. Okay, you can say that to a hockey goalie or a soccer goalie or whatever. If somebody comes up to you in the parking lot and tries to force you into a vehicle, you make them kill you right there. Because we know the stats say 80% are going to be dead within 2 hours of you getting in that car anyway. And how I convinced my wife was, hey, would you rather be dead right there and us find your body and be able to give you a proper burial, or be out in the woods somewhere where your death is a long, agonizing one after many things happen to you and we never find you and your body decomposes and all this graphic stuff I was telling her, ooh, yeah, I'd much rather him kill me right there. Okay, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to make him kill me right there, but I'm going to have a piece of me on him. Or vice versa, I'm going to have a piece of him under my fingernails or something. Okay, that's the mentality we want people to have. So the attacker's goals and motivations, well, they want to set the new record. 33 killed, 27 wounded is the record. Killed with a firearm. Virginia Tech. Now you'll hear me talk about a lot of incidents. You'll hear me talking about one here in just a little while. But you will, I try hard, I hate to say, always and never are big words, so I won't say that. But I try very hard not to mention suspects' names. Why? Not only do they not deserve it, but that's what they wanted in the first place. They wanted to be remembered.
Recognition.
Yeah, I'm not going to give them that recognition. The names I'm going to mention are the ones that were the heroes, whether they lived or died. I'm not going to give those suspects what they wanted. They know they have only 2 to 5 minutes to accomplish their goal before law enforcement gets there. So anything we can do as an organization to deter them, to detect them in the first place, deter, distract, defeat, or destroy, the better off we're going to be. They actually plan for their death or suicide at the end of this. That's part of their plan. So a person in which their goal is to set their new record and they plan for their death at the end, what kind of person would you call that? That's a pretty dangerous person, isn't it? They have no fear of death. They do not plan for escape, the hatred of the world, and sometimes particularly Christians. The Columbine attackers, I know the New Life attacker, both posted on websites about how much they hated Christians. And they posted that in advance. They have severe personal problems. Now, obviously they have severe personal problems or they wouldn't be doing this in the first place. But most of the time when people continue to have problems over and over in their life, and it's the same problems, who's the person who's the last person they blame? Let's put it that way. They're the last ones they blame. So guess what? That leaves everybody else that they have as an opportunity to blame somebody else. Now, if you have a church that has a prison ministry, maybe you go in and you counsel prison inmates, that elevates your risk. Because we know that prisoners, people that have been in prison, have a high level of recidivism. Meaning there's a very good chance they're going to go back to committing the same behavior they were before that caused them to be in there in the first place. So if they get in trouble again after you've counseled them, which is a great ministry to have, just be prepared because they may say, oh, that pastor told me if I just accept Christ into my life, everything will be hunky-dory for the rest of my life. Well, I promise you that's probably not what the pastor said. In fact, you're probably going to buy yourself a few extra problems. But it's a cost-benefit thing. Obviously, the benefits far outweigh the tribulations. But when something bad happens, guess who they're going to blame? They lied to me. Things aren't what they said it was going to be. Well, it's your behavior that's caused it. They show a high level of pre-planning and commitment. Sometimes some of these attackers plan for over a year in advance. Columbine shooters plan for over a year in advance. And obviously, because of the nature of the act they're doing, they show a high level of commitment. Now, if we know our attackers have a high level of pre-planning and commitment, what's that tell us we should have? Who said that? Are you cheating?
Well, I've already got one foot.
I know, you must be cheating. That's the exact word I was looking for. We got to have a higher level of pre-planning, a higher level of commitment. Okay? We know that it's not likely to occur, but let's have plans in place and let's prepare in advance if it were to occur. Now, when we train people, whether we're talking about law enforcement, military, school, or church safety security personnel, this is what we say. In fact, you'll see it on the footballs right there. Capability breeds humility. Now, we've trained we've trained about 8,500 personnel in 14 countries since 2002. And for the first 5-6 years, most of those were law enforcement and military. Now, you law enforcement guys that have done some training, first of all, if you've taught law enforcement in the past and you're a cop, raise your hand. Okay, what's it like to get in front of a bunch of cops, especially SWAT cops? And they're doing what you're doing right now. Okay, you got a high level of ego in the room. Okay, you can cut it with a knife. Usually when I see ego, that represents and manifests itself, and all I'm looking at is insecurity. Okay? When we start talking tactics, things get really religious. We might as well be talking about different denominations. Okay? But we believe this right here, and we've seen it. Some of the most capable people I've ever been around were the most humble people I've ever been around. And the reason is because they had a high level of capability. The more capability you give someone, the less they feel like they have to go there as far as their ego, as far as saying all the things that they've done in their life and how great they are. And many times I've seen cops and other people in organizations. There was a church up in the Northeast where a church security guard got indicted last year because he went out to the parking lot to deal with this homeless guy that kept coming back on the parking lot. And don't you know, he told him that he shouldn't have been coming back there. And he's told him multiple times. And by gosh, he's going to do something about it this time. And he's going to listen to me. Why? Because I said so. And he went out to the parking lot and tried to physically force this guy to leave. And this guy took it personally. And guess what happened? They ended up getting in a fight. The security guard ended up getting the worst end of it. And he ends up producing a knife to, what he says, defending himself and cutting the guy. And he got indicted. That's an example of insecurity. Or in law enforcement, we called it contempt of cop. This guy committed the felony of contempt of cop. He's made me mad. Okay? Don't take it personal. Because your ego won't accept it. Okay? Capability breeds humility. Pride equals insecurity or ego. If you see pride, that's just insecurity and ego. Most of the time when you see lack of capability, it manifests itself based on lack of training. And what you see is a posturing or a fear-biting response. We were up in Iowa at a federal law enforcement training center training some guys, and we had to, you can always pick them out. Day one, we do a lot of force-on-force training in our courses, in our law enforcement and tactical courses. That means it's projectile-based training. It's a biblical environment. It's better to give than receive. Okay? But it was day one in a classroom, and these guys didn't know. I mean, they were it. These guys were no-neck guys. What do I mean by that? They didn't have a neck. They were big, muscular guys, okay? And they were on the back row, folding their arms. And so we picked them out. Okay, there's our bottom feeders. Okay? So, day one, and then second half of day 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, you're getting in lots and lots of gunfights, force-on-force gunfights. Because the only way, you can be a great shot on the range, but the only way you learn how to fight people with guns is to fight people with guns. That's the only way. And we'll talk about here the reason for that here in just a minute. And guess what happened on the barricade field and in the house with these two guys? After end of day 2, they looked like they had ringworms. They've been shot so many times. But by the end of the week, we became good friends with them because they learned a lot during that week. And then they kept coming back to other courses and other courses. And then after about 4 or 5 courses they came to, their lieutenant came to me and he says, these are sheriff's deputies. He said, man, I don't know what you did with these guys, but they went from being my highest complaint getters on the department, but now they hardly ever get a complaint. Why is that, do you think?
You made them more secure in what they're doing.
Confidence in the
Exactly. I went and asked them, I said, what's the difference? And they said, well, before we're out there by ourselves in the middle of the county, and when people, especially in a multiple adversary environment, when we got scared, we started fear biting. It's right here. That's why dog bites, out of fear. And so we started treating people poorly. And guess what we were doing? We were escalating situations. Well, we know if we do that in the church realm, that's against the church safety and security mission. It's to de-escalate. But they did it strictly out of fear. So how do we eliminate fear? We give people a higher level of capabilities. That way they know I can treat people with a humble perspective because I know I can always go there if I need to because I have a high level of training. But naturally, people think they have to raise their voice and treat people poorly because they're scared. They think that'll scare. That's where this posturing comes in. Okay, fear-biting escalates situations, not that a quiet confidence that true capability exudes. I was talking to a guy at a trade show one time. He was my type of guy, just really nice guy. I could tell he was a military guy, but he just carried himself very confidently. He was really humble. And I talked to him about 20 minutes, and a guy came up to me and he said, hey, you know this guy? I said, well, I don't really know him. I just met him. I just getting to know him about 20 minutes. He goes, oh, man, you don't even know who you're talking to. And I said, well, what do you mean? I said, he was at Black Hawk Down. And I said, he was? Seriously? He didn't mention a word about that. He goes, yeah, that guy, he's killed more people than cancer. And I thought that was quite an introduction. But that's an example of what I'm talking about. This guy had this high level of capability, but he had a high level of humility. Capability breeds humility, which supports the mission. Okay? Again, the approach has to be escalated to de-escalate the situation. So, planning and preparing in advance. Why do we do that? Well, the reason we plan and prepare in advance is we want a trained, well thought out approach that will achieve the most effective results. What we're going to be accused of on the back end is, well, and this is after the first fight, there's always a second fight. What is that? Second fight, what is it?
Legal court.
That's the liability fight, right? And by the way, you can be 100% right and get sued. Okay? But it's much easier to defend a lawsuit when you're right. Okay? We're going to be accused of a subjective emotional reaction. Oh, those two people came into your worship service chanting Jesus was gay, and boy, that just ticked you off, didn't it? And you were going to go do something about it. And say, no. Actually, we have a policy and procedure that's called a code of conduct in place, and they were violating the core mission of our church, and based on that code of conduct, this is how we're supposed to handle it. So, no, we really didn't handle it subjectively. We handled it objectively based on policies and procedures and training that was in place ahead of time. Okay, so that's one of the reasons why we prepare in advance. We're going to be judged after the fact based on, again, getting accused of having a subjective reaction. So what do we expect from law enforcement? Well, you're going to see, hopefully, most law enforcement after April '99, we saw this mass evolution across law enforcement to this mindset of going in and taking down the threat, even as a patrol officer. Because we know that didn't work, that didn't happen in Columbine. I'm not saying anything about the Columbine response because those guys did what they were trained to do. Okay, you're going to see an armed, committed, trained, and immediate response to mitigate the threat before attending to the injured. One of our adjunct guys said this right here: good plan executed now is better than a great plan executed later. Let's not overplan this thing. Let's understand what we're trying to accomplish to de-escalate this situation. Let's go make it happen. Now, potential responders should be familiar with each other, and this is what we're talking about, having a strategy, policies, and procedures in place ahead of time so we can prevent this blue-on-blue situation. That means two good guys with great intentions accidentally shoot each other because they didn't know each other. We don't even know what each other's capabilities are. There's no baseline as far as what capabilities you should have before you carry a firearm in church. If your plan is to wait for on-duty law enforcement response, it will not be successful. Now, after the pastor was killed in Maryville, one of our adjuncts, he serves on the governor's security detail for the state of Missouri. He's a trooper. And he teaches our pastoral platform protection course. And the media showed up at his church. And he's part of his church safety security team, one of the leaders. And they said, hey, based on what happened in Maryville, what's your all's plan for if that was to happen here? And of course, his church leadership decided, well, we're not going to tell you what our plan is, but we're going to tell you we do have a plan in place to deal with all kinds of issues all the way up to an armed intruder. So then they went across the street to the Methodist church where the governor goes to church, and they said, what's your plan in place? And guess what they said? They didn't say we don't have one. They said, well, we've really thought about that long and hard, and what we've decided we're going to do is we're going to empower our ushers and greeters to call 911 if that was to happen here. Well, if I'm an usher and greeter in that church, I'm going to probably say, you know what, I appreciate you empowering me to call 911, but I'm probably going to do that anyway, whether you empower me to or not. So if your plan is to wait for law enforcement, you just plan for failure, okay? Now, the reason I say we need to have a strategic approach to who's allowed to carry firearms and what level of training they need to have is because, even though this isn't in a church, this is what we don't want. Because you can see this happening.
Yeah, I see that.
Now, can't you see that happening?
In Texas, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I just came from Arkansas. We taught a two-day. In Arkansas, you cannot carry in a church, even if you're a CCW holder, under any circumstance. In Missouri, you can if you have written permission from the governing body of the church. So, Mike Huckabee's church, old church, they said, well, we're going to have armed response capability in our church. So we did a 2-day commissioned security officer course, and they're going to have their security officers get commissioned and get that level of training. Okay, but I can see this now. I was telling them, I said, you know what? It's pretty restrictive in Arkansas not to have weapons in church. I said, but I'm getting ready to go to Texas, and I think it's illegal not to have a gun in Texas.
Usually we issue them at the door.
Do you issue them at the state line or at the door?
No, at the door of the church. They come in, they don't have one.
Okay. So we have to have a strategic approach. Maybe that you have a policy that only security safety people are allowed to carry weapons in church, or not. But you're going to have a lot of people that you have no idea what their level of training is. And there's many churches that they overreact, and they say, okay, if you, like what happened in Tennessee, pastor had a bring a gun to church day to celebrate Second Amendment. I started getting calls from the media. Hey, what do you think about this? No comment. Okay? That was probably the most dangerous day in that church's history. Why do we prepare in advance? Well, here's what a coach said one time. Poise under pressure comes from prior preparation. Preparing in advance allows us to have poise when the pressure's on. Now, let me ask you this question. Does preparation equal prevention? Doesn't, does it? New Life Church was prepared the day that happened, weren't you? You had a plan in place, you had personnel in place, and you also were alerted to ahead of it in advance, correct? They were prepared. But that doesn't equal prevention. What does it equal, though? What's it equal?
Prepared response.
Gives us an immediate capability to mitigate the threat. Preparation in advance also gives us a capability to be able to respond to that accusation of a subjective emotional reaction afterwards. Greg touched on it this morning. Training versus instincts. It's instinctual to flinch if somebody points a gun at you or throws a punch at you. It's instinctual to be afraid of the dark. It's instinctual to jump underneath the table and hide and go in the fetal position for some people. Why do we train though? We train to overcome our instincts, not to reinforce our instincts. Instincts are not the highest level of human performance. So what does our mentality and our mindset need to be? This is a picture of two guys, city workers, digging with shovels over a water main break, water spewing in the air. Our mindset in responding to the active shooter is this right here. We got to stop the water leak. Okay? We got to be plumbers. We're not going in to rescue victims, to treat injured or anything else. If you walk home tonight or back to your hotel room or wherever you're going, and you open the door and you walk in and you hear water running, and then it's like splash, splash, splash. What do you think? What are you thinking at that point? Oh, I got a water leak. How much sense would it make to grab a mop and start cleaning at that point? Bottom line is I got to go turn the water off first. I got to go shut the source of this mess off. And that's what our mindset needs to be. We're going to go turn the water off and then deal with the threat. I mean, deal with cleaning up the mess. Okay, so stopping the water leak, our mindset. Again, just went over the scenario. Now, this video here is from an incident that happened in California not too long ago. Richmond, California. I want you to watch. This doesn't show the actual church shooting going down, but what you're going to see is the response to the shots being fired from the choir. And again, this is instincts we're talking about. This is natural. Us as protectors, we are protectors. We have to overcome these instincts. But this is totally natural what you're going to see here. It's a short video.
Shots are fired during a Sunday afternoon church service in California.
Three gunmen opened fire on more than 100 churchgoers, hurting 2 teenagers. shots were fired inside the church. Police believe it was a targeted shooting, but won't say if the two victims were the intended targets. Both victims are expected to be okay.
Okay, again, that's natural. Bad guys are coming there looking for defenders. I just finished a book called Shooting Back by Charles Van Wyck. He's a missionary in South Africa. He was present during one of the worst church shooting attacks in history down in South Africa. 4 gunmen armed with automatic weapons entered the church, 1,500 people inside, with hand grenades and automatic weapons, and started firing. His first instinct was to jump behind a pew, but guess what he ended up doing? He carried a .38 snub-nosed revolver with him. Now, is that really the weapon you want if you're going to take on guys with submachine guns or machine guns and hand grenades? Hey, no, it wouldn't be my weapon of choice, but people ask me all the time, what's your favorite gun? Well, one I got in my hand when I need it. That's my favorite one. Okay? Well, he had his favorite gun with him that day. He fired 5 rounds, which is all he had in his weapon, and guess what happened? They took off running, jumped in their cars, and they got the heck out of there. Because that wasn't what they planned for. They didn't plan for that. And they thought, what the heck is going on? We thought we were going to have a field day, and one of them ended up getting injured. And they were out of there. Okay, this starting next month, this will be it. I don't know what happened. Losing my... Now, based on everything we've talked about, I want to go over an incident that happened almost 30 years ago next month. June of 1980. Dangerfield, as you know, is about an hour west of Texarkana, 2 hours east of Dallas. A little over 2 hours. Okay, I want to go over this incident and think about all of the things as far as the behavioral traits, the motivations, the commitment, and response by this church and the members within this church to this incident. Basically, let's talk about the suspect's motives and background. You had a male that had already been convicted on numerous counts of child molestation. Again, I'm not going to tell you his name. Who cares? He's released on bail, though. He's already out on bond. So even though he's been convicted, he hasn't been sentenced yet. His lawyer says, hey, you're looking at life, especially being in Texas. Okay, that's why one of the things I really like about Texas. It's kind of like the comedian that one time that said, hey, we got the death penalty in Texas, and we use it. They do. And his lawyer told him, hey, you're probably facing a death penalty. The only thing that's going to help you overcome this is if you have character witnesses that come testify for you at your sentencing. So he decided he was going to go back to his school teachers and people that he used to work with and get some character witnesses to see if they would testify for him at his sentencing. And guess what happened? All of them refused. All of them refused to testify. What do you think that did for him?
Didn't make him feel good.
It ticked him off. Okay? Now, again, we're getting back to my problems now as the suspect that's been convicted are not my fault. Whose fault are they? Everybody else's fault. And these people are part of the problem. And I'm a product of my environment. Now, a lot of them that he'd asked to be witnesses and refused, guess where they went to church? First Baptist Church, Dangerfield, Texas. The suspect was also a devout atheist. Okay, so again, you guys talked about the profile earlier this morning. The suspect had a PhD in psychology. Really didn't mean anything, obviously. He didn't have the ability to function from day to day. He's motivated by different things than you and I are. Also, in his background was in 1966, he'd accidentally shot his dad. Who knows if that was an accident or not, but that's what they were thinking. Again, we see suspect background and what was motivating him. Now let's see his level of pre-planning and commitment. He's armed with 2 rifles, 2 pistols, and over 400 rounds of ammunition, kind of like the New Life shooter. He had multiple hundreds of rounds of ammunition. One of the rifles, at least, I'm not sure about the other one, was an M16 variant, an AR-15 style weapon. Okay, an assault rifle. He's equipped with body armor on his front and on his back, and he wore a ballistic helmet when he came to church, and he's wearing military fatigues. Now, keep in mind, he's already looking at a life sentence. He knows he's going to jail for life. So guess what he's decided now? I'm not going to jail. I'm going to kill myself, but guess what? You said it. I'm going to take a lot of people with me. Yep, I'm as far as headed. There you go. So he had nothing to lose now. He entered the sanctuary. The outside doors went directly into the sanctuary and yelled, "This is war," and he began to fire. 400 rounds of ammunition, multiple weapons. Numerous rounds that he fired from the prone position and the standing position. He killed 5 people and wounded 12. Now, this situation could have been a lot worse than it was. It's kind of like New Life. That was a success in my mind because that could have been so much worse than what it was. Okay, they were prepared, however. So what was the congregation actions? Well, we had a percentage of people that were based on their instincts. They went prone. They hid behind pews, did whatever they could. But we had some people that decided they were going to do something. Now, prior to this event occurring a few weeks earlier, the youth group had done a skit talking about, keep in mind, this is 1980, the Cold War is still going on. They'd done a skit talking about trying to illustrate what happens if communism comes to the U.S. And they did the skit dressed in military fatigues. And they were talking about how that was going to affect them from a Christianity point of view. So guess what a lot of people in the congregation thought was happening when this started? Thought it was, and that's not unusual. It's not unusual at all. Because when bad things happen, people rationalize it away, and they rationalize away what's happening with irrational arguments. Patty, the Columbine teacher that called 911, was on the phone with him for 4.5 minutes before the shooters came in the room. One of the things she said is, I heard shots going off, and guess what? Which of our 5 senses we make decisions on primarily? Our sight. 80% of the information that we gather comes from our sight in which we make decisions. So even though she heard the shots, guess what she did? She dismissed it and then went out to try to make a decision. Guess what she went out in the hallway to do? To see, try to confirm what she had heard. She goes out in the hallway. She ends up getting shot. Doesn't really know she's shot. She told the dispatcher, I think I got something in my shoulder. She didn't know what it was. Even though she sees them shooting, she sees guys out in the hallway shooting, and she'd been shot. Guess what she said she thought was happening then? Even though she's been shot. She said, I thought it was a video production. So again, under duress, when a critical incident happens, people rationalize it away, try to come up with all these irrational explanations. Skits are where a lot of this happens. First Baptist Church of Maryville, many of the congregation reported that when the rounds went into the pastor's Bible, first round went into the pastor's Bible, that pieces of the Bible went flying everywhere, pieces of paper. And guess what they thought? They thought this was a skit because they're coming up with any explanation of how this can't be happening. Oh, this can't be happening. This got to be a skit. Okay, speaking of skits, we got to make sure we educate ourselves that whoever's in charge of dramas, we make sure we talk to those people every week. Because bad things can happen on the opposite end. Fellowship Northwest Arkansas, big church, they had a guy, one of their security guys happened to see somebody walking in with a gun case, long gun case, into the doors. And he kind of pulled him aside and he says, hey, what do you got in there? Well, I got a shotgun. Well, what for? Oh, we're going to use it in the skit. I don't know what the skit was. Nobody told security. Imagine armed security and somebody shows up on the platform with a shotgun. What kind of tragedies can happen? Go ahead, Jeff.
Happened at New Lake.
Same thing?
After the shooting, yeah.
Okay, tell me about it.
Our high school ministry, they had a kind of a prom night, and so they were doing a skit on the father waiting for the daughter to come home kind of deal.
Uh-huh.
So they wanted to bring a shotgun into the church to do that.
Did they let you know about it?
I found out about it through the
Of course.
rumor mill. I did end up stopping it, and these are some of the same people that were running with their kids to get out of the church when the shooting was happening.
Yep. Yeah, common.
I said, oh, it won't be loaded. I said, you're right, it won't.
Well, that'll be one of us. That will be one of us that isn't loaded. Okay, people, common sense isn't so common anymore, is it? Okay, again, many of the congregation thought it was a skit, killed 5, wounded 12. Now, Chris Hall, he's a young person there. He decided he's a hero. I'm not going to watch this happen. So he's one of the young people. He saw the opportunity. He jumped on the suspect's back. Okay? He slowed him down for just a little bit. Chris didn't get wounded because as soon as Chris went down, the suspect didn't have a chance to deal with him. I'll tell you why here in just a second. Gene Gandy, he said, you know what? I may get beat, but I'm going to get beat doing something. Keith Melton, Terry, both of those are the guys that I've become friends with. They were the ones that tackled the shooter at First Baptist Church of Maryville. They described to me what happened. They said, once they realized what was happening, they said, you know what? I may get beat, but I may get beat doing something. And Terry, as soon as Pastor Fred was shot, it was a contact shot. He was already on his way to try to stop this. And the suspect's weapon jammed. He dropped the gun and was trying to head to the back. Terry grabbed him. Go ahead and step up here, Kevin. I'm the bad guy. You're the good guy. Give me around my arms in a bear hug. Suspect reaches in his inner coat, grabs a knife, and sinks it into his kidneys. Terry held on to him, continued to hang on to him. Again, he made the decision, I'm going to do something. He didn't have a weapon. As soon as some other people got there, Terry let go and he collapsed onto a pew. Nobody knew Terry had gotten stabbed yet. Terry said, last thing I remember is, I said, man, he got me good. He said he let go momentarily when he caught a blade in the kidneys. And when he did, the suspect slashed and trying to get him off, and you could see scars on his arms. He got some really serious stab wounds on his, or slashing wounds on his arms. As soon as he got help there, he let go. Keith Melton said, I was headed towards the pastor. As soon as I saw what was happening, him and the suspect were struggling. He says, I got within an arm's length of him when the last round went off. He said, I was checking on the pastor. The suspect dropped the gun. He goes, I was kind of fixated on this. And that's when Terry grabbed the guy. Terry passed out. His dad, there's a hospital 3/4 of a mile down the road. His dad went and grabbed the minivan, brought it up to the front. He wasn't going to wait for the ambulance to get there. He throws Terry into the side of the vehicle. Terry says, I'm completely out cold. I don't know. He goes, lost the blood, shock, whatever it is. He goes, I don't remember anything. He goes, then all of a sudden my leg really started hurting, and I came to. Well, guess what happened?
You got shot
Closed
with
the
that
van
last
door on
bullet.
his leg.
Huh?
Closed the van door on his
Sliding door on the van. They were hurried to get out of there, and they slammed the door on his leg. And I said, well, the good news is they took your mind off the stab wound. He goes, yeah, they sure did. Okay, those actions right there is what saved his life, getting him to the hospital quickly. Gene Gandy, he rushed the attacker, trying to stop the attack. He was killed. He was gunned down. Jack Dean, he got 2 of his fingers blown off and his elbow was severely wounded, rushing the attacker because he's not going to let this happen. This is their family they're protecting, their church family they're protecting. Red McDaniel, guy was 6'4", 290 pounds. Wasn't his brother, but another guy that could have been his brother, Kenneth Truitt, 6'4", 300 pounds. They made a decision, I may get beat, but I'm going to get beat doing something. So guess what these 2 monsters did? They charged this guy, and they both hit him at the same time, shoulders lowered like linebackers. Lifted him off the ground, and he hit that door so hard that he came in, it took both doors off the hinges. These guys did this even though he was putting rounds into them as they were aggressing him. Both these guys died. But when he got blasted out of those doors like that, he was on his feet and he was out of there. That was, okay, these people are going to fight back. I'm out of here. Just heroes all the way through it. I get chills up my spine thinking about it. He ran away, went to a local fire station, shot himself in the head. He couldn't even do that right. He ended up living. He was arrested. He was going to face trial because he was still competent enough. It wasn't a bad enough wound. But while he was waiting trial, he hung himself and killed himself in the church. John 15:13. This is the bottom line. Greater love hath no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends. We saw an example of this many times. First Baptist Church, Maryville, everybody that responded at New Life, those people were willing to lay down their lives for their fellow man. We have an advantage, mindset-wise, that these bad guys and these wolves and these animals don't have. We have an advantage and a power on our side that they can't even comprehend. Okay, when I was on SWAT and I was in the back of the armored car ready to go, I'm not going to say I wasn't scared because I don't want to be with the guy that's on the team that isn't scared. But I was scared, but guess what I was scared for? I wasn't scared for my own personal safety. Why not, you think? What'd you say? Yeah, I knew where I was going if I died. Guess what I was scared for, though? My buddies and who else? Yeah, what was going to happen to my family? Okay, that was the main reason I was scared. Okay, these guys don't have what we got. The capability, the mission, the drive, knowing that God's put you in this position for a reason. All you guys are here for a reason. I'm here. Chuck, what he's been doing over the last several years, I mean, he's divinely appointed to do what we're doing. You guys are as well. Okay? Now, off my soapbox, I'll show you a video here. Hey, bottom line, Job 8:21 says, He fills my lips with laughter and my mouth with shouts of joy. Real serious just for a little bit. Now we're going to lighten it up just for a little bit. As far as defense principles for churches.
Welcome to the first meeting of Complete Self-Defense for Women. I'm Bob Jackson. I have a black belt in karate. I've studied martial arts for over 20 years. I'm also a former world champion. Now, this course may cost more than others, but I guarantee you'll never be afraid of violence again. Now let me ask, what are you ladies most concerned about? Yes, you!
Okay, say you find out something about your husband, like he got another wife and some kids. What I want to know is, how do you kill a man in his sleep?
Let me think about that one. Why don't we start, though, with defense against the knife attack? Who would like to attack me?
Oh, me, I got one in my purse.
Why don't you try?
Real nice.
Don't worry about it, grasshopper.
I don't know, I really, I don't think I should.
Okay, come on!
I'm really sorry. I didn't mean it. Are you all right?
I'm fine. I shifted my internal organs to avoid the knife. However, like a lot of beginning students, you attacked me wrong. You're supposed to come at me like this. Remember that and try it again.
Okay. Downward thing. All right.
You see, you're still bending your elbows. You've got to keep your arm completely straight.
All
That's
right.
the whole key.
Oh, God. All right.
Try it one more time.
Straight. Okay. I got it. All right.
That's it.
Yeah.
Just like that.
Yeah. Are you crazy? It's our first day.
I just wanted to show her how easy it can be.
Yeah.
After years,
This class is a ripoff. I want my money back. Right, me too. And I looked it up, and in 1976, Chuck Norris was the world champion. Oh, what?
I never said I was the only world champion. There were lots of them. I sparred with Elvis.
Wow. Okay, say you wake up from a deep sleep, and your wife is doing this. And I turn up this.
Yeah, okay. Obviously not what we're going to do in churches. So, obviously, we know that although the need for an active shooter response is very, very, very unlikely, what training are we going to need if we decide this is the response capability that we do want? Okay? Now, case law says training should meet minimum requirements. The kind of the main case precedent for training is this: Papal versus Margate. Basically, it says has your personnel received adequate training that will allow them to accomplish the mission or accomplish the task that you're asking them to perform? Okay, now if we're talking about ushers, passing the offering plate from place to place and then going handing it to the head usher, that requires how much training? Not a whole lot. Minimum amount of training. But if we're talking about asking someone to deal with an armed intruder, and we'll talk about it in a minute, swim upstream, maintain good shooting platform, and hit what you're shooting at, or make good decisions, am I going to shoot at all? What kind of training do you think that takes in a crowded environment? That takes an extensive amount of training when you're asking somebody to perform that kind of mission or that kind of task. So again, they're going to look at, you're going to be judged on, has your personnel been given training adequate to that task that you're asking them to perform? Papal versus Margate outlined several criteria for training, receiving training. 7 of them to be exact. Is the training you're receiving validated by goals and objectives? Is the persons conducting the training qualified? Is the training properly conducted and documented? Is the training state-of-the-art and up-to-date? Are there adequate measures of mastery? And are those measures of mastery documented? In other words, if you're going to ask somebody to deal with an armed intruder and have that kind of skill set, just simply handing them a policy and say, this is what you do if you come across an armed intruder that's trying to kill people or is killing people, that is not good enough. Canton versus Ohio says that we cannot, having check-the-box training, meaning training where you just have somebody watch a video and say, okay, Dominus Ominous, you're trained. Okay, that's not good enough. And if they failed initially the training, is there a plan for remedial training? If the objectives were not met. And last one, was there supervision present by an instructor to monitor their progress? So the evolution of training, how we train people to again, gunfight. Again, there's no shortcut. The only way you learn how to fight people with guns is to fight people with guns. Kind of like the UFC. In the UFC, you don't learn to compete at a high level in the UFC by hitting the heavy bag all the time, do you? You've got to get in there and spar with somebody. You've got to create a reasonable simulation of the real thing. But we've got to start somewhere, right? Well, what we're going to start is with our ABCs of training. Basically, that is firing the weapon, going to the range and learning stance, trigger pull, trigger squeeze, sight alignment, sight picture, all those things. Okay? Lining these up, these two things up. Now, the example I'll give is, who's got a push button pen? Anybody? Is that a push button? Okay, good. Okay. Kevin, you're my fighter pilot, okay? Get your joystick ready, okay? And this right here, that's your missile button right there, okay? Now when I tell you to, when you see these two things line up, you're going to hear two different distinct tones. When you hear the higher pitch tone, that means you got lock and tone and missiles away, okay? Okay, get ready. You want to practice a little bit? Go ahead and give me a missile away there. Okay, going to have to be a little quicker than that, Kevin. Okay, there you go. Pretty good. Okay, you ready? You see these two line up. Doo, doo. Well, that was good. Try it one more time. Doo, doo. Okay, good. Okay, now, if I'm in the battalion of fighter pilots and I've seen Kevin go through this training, he's ready to go dogfight with me, isn't he? Huh? He's not? Why not? Why isn't he? He's already shown me he can line up these two pieces of metal, and man, he can make these nice little tight groups on the range. Oh, what? It's only one piece of the puzzle? What else is involved? Decision making, position before submission, getting in the right position to take that kill shot, making sure I don't have any other adversaries around in the environment, using my partners, leveraging my partners, situational awareness, all those things. Man, you named off about 5 football answers there. Okay? But here's what happens. We get guys on the range, and they think, and man, when they get done with their silhouette target, they got all this nice group, pretty on the range. And then when they get done, hey, I'm going to take this home. I'm going to show it to my wife, my dog, my neighbors, and show them how good a gunfighter I am. Can you initial that and put the date? And if I can find a notary around here, I'm going to have somebody notarize this and show them what a great gunfighter I am. That does not make me a gunfighter, does it? Big deal. I can make a nice little group on the range. That's my ABCs. That's all it is. I've proved that I can do a function check on my weapon, and I can, if I follow those principles and line up those pieces of iron, I can make it shoot straight. That's all I'm doing. And at nighttime, if I do the same thing at night, turns out my weapon works just as good at night as it does during the daytime. That doesn't make me a gunfighter. CCW training is not nearly enough to effectively respond to an armed intruder whose goal is to rack up a body count. That's why we recommend against allowing just CCW holders alone carry weapons to church. Because CCW training is designed to protect yourself, and it's designed to protect your domicile, your home. It's not designed to protect others in a crowded environment where you're going to be swimming upstream, having to deal with single or multiple adversaries, and all the dynamics that come along with that. Okay? Just because I've learned my ABCs doesn't mean I'm ready to go write a top 10 bestseller novel, am I? So, next level. Again, we are on the range still. We're going to teach shooting on the move, shooting with both hands, one hand. I get tickled at guys that cannot shoot their weapon or will not shoot their weapon with one hand. They didn't call it a hands gun, they called it a handgun. For a reason. Standing, kneeling, modified prone. We base our firearms program on 1 Chronicles 12, 1 and 2. It talks about David's warriors. It didn't say that he had warriors that fought for him. It talks about how good these warriors were. These guys had the ability to shoot, fire their bows, throw spears, shoot arrows, and sling stones with both their right and their left hand, it says. That means you have to have a bilateral capability. Ability to operate your weapon one-handed, either right or left, standing, kneeling, modified prone, moving forward, moving backward, moving laterally with either hand. Okay, guess what? There's no shortcut to that kind of skill set. It takes repetition and takes time on the range. That's this next level. That's where we're writing sentences and are putting our ABCs in formed sentences. Now we're talking about writing novels. How we write novels with our weapon. Well, scenario training is where it's at. Force-on-force training. We have to create a reasonable simulation of the real thing. Now we had a guy, we did a low-light course, a 5-day low-light course in Las Vegas. And one of the guys that came, he's a really good guy. His name is Ernie Langdon. You look him up on the internet, Ernest Langdon. He's a 6-time national low light shooting champion, IDPA. This guy can outshoot me 10 times out of 10 is on the range. Daylight, nighttime, you name it. And I've known him for a while before that, but he came to this course, and man, he was an unbelievable shooter. But when we went force on barricade drills where we had 2 on each end of the field with paintball weapons and turned the lights out, and we had an infrared video camera and we're taping this, Ernie, man, he was high level. He was high speed because he's inventing new shooting positions that I'd never seen before. When bullets were flying at him, we were giving him a hard time about it. And he was as humble as could be. He goes, man, none of them steel targets I ever shot before shot back. Again, we're training to overcome our instincts. Now we're learning to work against an adversary that's willing to move, thinks as well, and shoots back, and it hurts. Okay, scenario training is what it takes. You have to learn to engage people with guns to learn how to fight with a gun. This level of training allows you to create your tactical and protection Rolodex. What that means is we go through lots of different scenarios, shoot and don't shoot scenarios and drills. Then we're building our little Rolodex, our protector's Rolodex up here. Any ideas what I mean by that? Muscle memory and what else? Which is faster, a conscious or a subconscious decision? Subconscious decision. Now, not a subconscious instinctual reaction, because an instinctual reaction is just as fast as a subconscious decision, but most of the time it's not right. So a subconscious decision, well, the way we create subconscious decisions is we go through scenarios. And we learn from those scenarios and we say, you know what, that worked repeatedly. That didn't work, I'm going to throw that one out. I'm not going to put that in my little Rolodex, my mental tactical Rolodex. But that one did work. That one worked 3 times out of 3, or it worked 8 times out of 10. Bottom line is, you get enough gunfights, you're going to lose one of these days. That bullet really doesn't care what you have at home on your I love me wall with all your certificates and what initials you have on your chest and what your background is. But we're trying to increase probabilities of prevailing. Okay? So what happens if you're presented with a situation in real life that is close to what you went through in that scenario training, your mind says, okay, I went through a close scenario to that in training, go retrieve that little Rolodex card, make a decision based on that, and this is what I'm doing. But if the real thing happens, and we know these gunfights are lasting about 2.5 seconds, we don't have time to write out our little Rolodex card at that time. It's got to be ready to rock. Okay, we can work under the influence of the SNS, which is the sympathetic nervous system, which we'll talk about here in a minute. We can start stress inoculating ourselves, meaning we can learn to operate under the influence of the sympathetic nervous system. It's going to activate anyway in real life. We might as well learn to activate it in training and learn to inoculate ourselves to that sort of stress. Then we can work through our if-then decisions. If this happens, then I'll do this. If this happens, then I'll do that. If I'm sitting up here in the front left row and a guy approaches the platform, he's got a weapon out and he's target fixated on his target, and I'm up on my feet, am I going to get to my weapon first and try to engage this guy? Or am I just going to put my weapon away because I'm so close to him, I'm going to take him down right there without getting my weapon out? Because another mistake guys make is they think once that missile leaves the barrel, okay, it's over. Okay? Greg touched on it this morning. Guys argue, I mean, it gets really religious. Guys argue about calibers. 9mm versus 45. Man stopper. That 45 is a man stopper. And Greg touched on it this morning. Hey, people ask me my favorite caliber all the time. I say, you know what? Again, it's about the gun I have in my hand at the time. Until we start making sure that those other 4 out of 5 rounds that are missing their target hit that person, let's forget about that 1/8 of an inch diameter on the bullet. Because unless it hits in 2 small, very small areas, we're not going to shut this guy down as quick as he needs to be shut down. We have a little saying that we say, a guy is a threat and he will continue to be a threat unless the head is separated from the body by more than 4 feet. You better consider him a threat. Because he can still operate, he especially still operate this, even if he's got multiple rounds in him. Okay? You can shut a guy down hydraulically, bleeding him out, skeletally if his skeleton's broken down, or electrically. if we hit him in the right spot. But that's a tough shot. We got to have solutions and work on scenarios that maybe disables a guy immediately. I'm right there, I'm going to take him down, or I'm going to knock that weapon out of his hand, whatever. Remember, we're making decisions as protectors, not on behalf of ourselves, because if we're about protecting ourselves, and that's the highest priority, guess what my decision is going to be if that's my highest priority? Here's my resignation letter. I'm not on the security team anymore. Okay? We're making our decisions on behalf of others. Humility, summed up in 3 words, is the absence of self. That's why you guys are making decisions. Okay, mental rehearsals and scenarios. Again, we already talked about it. Always keep up to date on this. If you hear of another incident, whether it's a lethal response incident or if it's just a protester or whatever that happens at another church, find out as much about that incident and educate yourself, and then you put yourself in that own scenario. What would I do if that happened at my church? Again, you're going to continue building that mental tactical Rolodex. Okay, swimming upriver. This is what you're going to have to know how to do if this happens. We're going to have to know how to swim upstream in a raging river. What do I mean by that? I'm going to have this mass of humanity coming at me, and I've got to maintain a shooting platform, try to work my way through that to deal with the threat, to go turn the water off. Okay, that's not going to be easy. That's going to take, again, a skill set. It's going to take some drills. We have a gauntlet drill we'll set up, put blue guns in the guy's hands on active shooter response, particularly for law enforcement. And you got 2 lines of people there. And as you come through the line, people are bumping you, shoving you, and everything else. And you got to stay relaxed because you're going to have to try to maintain a shooting platform as you make it through the gauntlet. Because if you tighten up and you try to push back against everything you feel, you're going to be off balance the whole way through. Okay, 4 pillars of an effective protector. Breathing is the first one. Genesis, breath of life. Okay? Now, anybody here NASCAR fans that you'll admit to it? Who's your favorite driver? Dale Earnhardt Jr. What do you think about Jeff Gordon? Do you? That's kind of hard to like both of them, isn't it? I thought it was either or. Okay, I'm with you. Okay, let's say you're Dale Earnhardt Jr. I'm your crew chief. And I come up to you, hey Dale, we are ready to rock. They already got your engine started. We got the car all tuned up. You're ready to go. Okay, you feel pretty good?
Yep.
Okay, we're ready. Oh man, hey, you need to get out there, but guess what? I forgot to top off. I forgot to even put too much fuel in it. Okay, how much good is all the preparation with testing, millions of dollars of race car equipment going to do without fuel? Not going to do much good. Guess what our fuel is? Yeah, it's breath. Breath. Managing breath control. Under duress, when the bad things happen, guess what people do though? They hold their breath. This organ up here and these organs right here don't function very well without oxygen, do they? The breath is one of those 4 pillars. Movement. We have to be willing to move. Okay, we're not going to be calling this gunfight at high noon, both of us looking at each other downrange, looking at my mirror image in a 50-50 gunfight. Posture. Posture is going to be important. Now, a lot of what is being taught out there it works against these 4 pillars. A lot of times when guys get on the range, they teach them to really bring their shoulders in, their head down, get behind their gun, and do this. What's this do to our posture? Tenses everything up, and I'll get with the 4th pillar here in just a second. But what's it do to our breathing? I've just put a clamp on my diaphragm. Okay? It hurts our breathing, but the reason we do this is because we want that nice tight little group downrange so I can take it home and show my dog. Okay? We got to maintain good posture, more of a natural stance. And then the last one is relaxation. This was a tough one. Learning to be relaxed when bullets are flying is tough. It's non-instinctual. Guess how we overcome that though? Training. You train to overcome your instincts. You staying somewhat relaxed under duress. That's where you make better decisions. Okay, why realistic training? Well, we want to activate the sympathetic nervous system. Let's define it. That part of the autonomic nervous system that helps mobilize the body for action. When a person is under stress, it produces the fight or flight response. Examples of this: heart rate, breathing rate go up, the blood vessels narrow, and constrict. So you're going to see increased heart rate, rapid breathing, elevated blood pressure, and target fixation and tunnel vision. That's what happens in real life. So let's learn to activate that sympathetic nervous system in training. Well, we can't do that on the range, firing rounds down range, can we? Why is it we can't do that on the range? Well, training day wouldn't be very long if we had guys down there shooting lethal rounds back, would it? Okay? So usually we activate the sympathetic nervous system through one of three ways: death, serious bodily harm, and pain. Well, they frown on us using the first two in training. So we use pain. That's where we use the projectile-based training to activate it, fear of pain. Those things that we learn under the influence of possible pain as a consequence, we learn quicker. We also start inoculating ourselves to adrenaline, and when the sympathetic nervous system activates, we start getting used to that sympathetic nervous system activating. Then we can get that stress inoculation, and we learn to relax. We learn to operate in the influence of sympathetic nervous system activation. A lot of times when we'll do building searches as instructors, even though it's a force-on-force environment, we've done it a lot. And when we find somebody that's hiding somewhere, maybe he's already kept off a couple rounds and missed, we'll tell him, "You in the closet, step on out here now. I can't guarantee you're going to survive this unless you do what I say right now." And a lot of times we'll get the feedback from the bad guys. Guess what he says after he gives up? "Man, that kind of scared me." Well, why? I wasn't screaming at you. A lot of times, that's why I don't like watching cops anymore. Usually the first part of the cops is the car chase or the foot chase. And at the end of that car chase or foot chase, you got 4 or 5 cops. One of them's yelling, "Get down." The other one's yelling, "Get up." The other one's yelling, "Don't move." Screaming at the top of their lungs. That's nothing more than fear. Okay, this poor bad guy don't know what to do. But that's the sympathetic nervous system activating. And again, that fear biting that comes out under the influence of fear. So most of the time, when we first start training in scenarios and force on force, this is how we like to visualize ourselves, which is a good mental exercise to go through. Man, I'm going to take it to him. Okay? Make my day. But when the bullets start flying and there's pain associated with it, guess who we turn into? Pee-wee shows up. Now, Pee-wee will always be there, but the more you learn to operate under the influence of the sympathetic nervous system being activated, the more we can keep Pee-wee to the sidelines. What questions do you have? That was just a general overview.
How do you, in actual training, how do you use pain? Give me an example.
Projectiles, paintball, plastic BBs. The Cherokee Indian said only true wisdom comes from pain. Okay, not injury, but pain. That's like when we train sometimes, usually after day 1 on a 5-day course, we'll see guys that show up on day 2 and they look like the Michelin Man because they went back to the hotel and they put towels around them and underneath their long sleeve shirt. And I'm like, "Man, you gained about 40 pounds. And we make them take that stuff off. Because you're not going to get, yeah, I'm pretty sure everybody here, if they pad up enough, they can walk through all these rounds like RoboCop. Okay, but that doesn't do you any good, because if you learn to do that, when the real thing happens, you're not going to be around very long. Exactly. So we have to activate that sympathetic nervous system through pain. What other questions? Yes, sir.
Well, it's not a question. When I was in the military, we had 5 P's, and it was prior planning prevents poor performance.
Okay, I thought you were going to say something else.
I almost that's
Yeah. Okay, it's 5 versus 6. Okay. I heard the other one when I was in the military many times myself. It was usually followed by a few other expletives.
yeah.
Stinking private. Okay, any other questions? Okay, again, I want to thank Chuck for what he's doing here in this ministry and for the opportunity to come down and visit with you guys. Thank you.